Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Review 689. Today we're going to talk about Relicblade. And what Relicblade is typically a two-player skirmish miniature game. You play on about a 2 foot by 2 foot area, maybe 3 foot by 3 foot, but the game's really designed to be a small scale, low model count miniature game. And it is designed, sculpted, illustrated, put together, published by a fellow named Sean Sutter. He does all the art in the books. He's the publisher. He sculpts the minis. You get all this stuff at the relicblade.com website, which I'll have links to below. So he is sort of, if you're a board gamer, he's kind of like the Ryan Lockett of miniature games. He does all the art, the design, everything. And you can get here, what I'm showing you here is just the kind of the basic rules. This is the hardcover rules. You can get this stuff in PDF if you want. You can also get a little kind of like starter packs of miniatures here and clamshells, which I'll show you what kind of comes in those. There's a narrative kind of campaign book and so on. So let's jump down and look at how you actually play the game, and then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts on it. So here I've got some of the stuff that you can buy at the Relicblade website. Now obviously, to get you started, you're going to want to get a copy of the Seeker's Handbook. This is the rule book, and you can get this nice hardcover edition, or you can get it on PDF if you wish. Now he also has got a sort of a bundle that you get the rule book and then one of these kind of like starter clam packs here for one of the different factions. So you can see here I have the Bone and Darkness faction set, and then here's the Lone Guard faction set. So you can get both of these together. I believe it's $60 for the hardcover rulebook and a set of these. And then you can also get other sets of these. You can get individual figures like heroic figures, mercenary style figures, and those will come with just one model. Now all of the figures, which I'll show you here in a minute, are going to come with cards sort of representing their stats and so on and different abilities that they can do. You also notice down here in the lower right hand corner, this is like the cost. So if you're playing a campaign or doing kind of like a matched play kind of style thing where you're doing like 100 points each or whatever you agree to, then this is the kind of the point cost or the influence cost if you talk about it in a campaign, which I'll talk about in a minute. And there's some other stats here. These are the action points, the movement, and then the defense, and then some of the attacks and so on. So those are the Bone and Darkness cards, and then here are the Lone Guard cards there. And then also, you will have, if you so wish to purchase, you can get a relic deck, and this, you can see the game is called Relicblade. And so these are some of the really cool, fantastical treasures that you will shuffle these up, and then these will come into play. And there's different decks for like different campaign settings and so on. These are just really cool abilities and stuff that you can get. And then, not to be undone, here is a bunch of these sort of upgrades and spells. And you can see like this is a hand axe. You can see it's gold cost or it's points cost, depending if you're playing a campaign, you'll use the gold cost versus points if you're just kind of doing like a one-off match play game and different things like that. You got like different abilities. You see this one's like scout only and so on, so you can get these cards here. And these are all illustrated by Sean here, and these are great illustrations, I gotta say. And so he's done all the illustrations, all of the rules design, as well as the sculpts for the miniatures, which we'll go ahead and take a look at now. So here we can see the Bone and Darkness set here, and that's these 4 miniatures there. This fella here, you can build a couple of different ways. I chose to give him the bow, and these are just cool skeleton type things. This guy here is actually like a construct, so there's some different rules involved with him. And then this thing here is actually kind of a one-off special character. This does not come in this box set, but this one you can add and supplement this army with that. Now these are all metal miniatures. If you watch my channel at all, you know I'm not the hugest fan of putting together metal miniatures in general, but I found these to be relatively easy to put together in terms of how easy it is to build, because the metal can be a little bit heavy sometimes and it's hard for the glue to just hold it. I didn't have to use any green stuff or anything like that, which is kind of like, for me, I'm a little bit of a stuck up about it. I hate when I have to use green stuff just to assemble a game I want to play. I didn't have to do that with any of these. There's a little bit of balancing and so on, but you can kind of see kind of the end result. These are just painted up relatively quickly with some contrast paints, and the contrast paint itself took pretty well to these models here. So let's go ahead and look at the Lone Guard. So here we have the Lone Guard, and again, these 4 up front are in the Lone Guard pack, and then this guy here in the back is a special character. And again, these are, you know, metal miniatures. These are easy to put together. I did kind of a funky scheme on this dog. I saw another picture of it, I think on the website. They had some different painted up versions of these, so I kind of like that weird kind of mystical ghost thing there. If I remember correctly, gosh, I might have forgotten. It's been a couple weeks since I put these together. This one or this one you could build in a different way. I might be wrong about that. And then this guy here is kind of the special character there. And I kind of made him a little bit more colorful based on some of the artwork and stuff that was on the website. So anyway, I like these miniatures. They're nice poses, and you know, they're pretty evocative, and they match the artwork, and I like them. Now, one neat thing about this game is when you set up for a campaign or building your warband, you are going to basically pick the adversary or the ally. And there's also some neutral characters as well. And you can tell easily by the card back which side these belong to here. So the bone construct here is an adversary. You've got that dark, you know, scary one. And then the allied side here, you know, you've got the Lone Guard Ranger. And so you can mix and match these. They don't have to be necessarily from within that specific faction. So you can be very dedicated and do just like an all Lone Guard style build. But you could also, you know, mix and match. There's some battle pigs and things like that that look really interesting that you can do. And so you can really kind of have fun and play around with building your warband. Now, before I forget, a nice thing is you've got the main rules in here, but each of these faction sets, they'll come with the cards to match the models there. And also, let me open this up real quick. So we'll go ahead and open this. Inside here, it will have some of the extra rules that are kind of specific to that faction and some of the models that come in the clamshell. Now, those rules are still referenced in here, but it's just kind of a quick start, like, oh, that's right, this faction does this special thing. Like I talked about this guy being a construct. And then it also gives you a scenario focused on that faction. So you get like a bonus scenario. So we'll take a quick dance through the rule book here. One nice thing I wanted to just show you here is you can see Sean did a illustration, a little sketch, and then, you know, sort of autographed it. Now, he doesn't just do this for reviewers. I've seen him do that. I think he does this for absolutely everybody that orders from him. So that's kind of a nice touch, a nice, very personal touch that he does. So if we go into here, you can see this rule book here is full of, you know, pictures of miniatures. Even though it's one person doing this, it is a very high quality production. And I believe he had a Kickstarter a couple years ago to kind of get going, but now it's just direct order, you know, through his website here. And this cool illustration here, here's the battle pigs I talked about. So I kind of skipped through the rules, which I'll kind of demonstrate. I might want to just kind of show you a little bit of the campaign stuff that you get, just so you get a sense of like how much kind of depth you can sort of plumb out of this game. Like I said, you can do the advocate, I think I said ally earlier, advocate and adversary, and you pick your side there. And then you will get a different kind of sort of starting money and influence based on a base that you pick. And then you will spend either money or influence to buy items or, you know, heroes or adventurers, I should say. But then you can also get specialists. Now, another neat part of the game here is you can see this is fate weaving, and these cost influence to use. But if you go up against sort of an imbalanced type of game, let's say I have 100 influence points worth of stuff, and then, you know, maybe you have 80, then you would get 20 fate points, which is sort of free influence that you can spend over the course of the game. These are all different actions to like sort of mitigate dice rolls, you know, different phases of the game and that kind of stuff. So this is a very, very important part of the game. So it's kind of nice. So the sort of the underdog gets some free points that they can spend, although the other player can still spend influence sort of out of their main bank of influence to, you know, do some of these rerolls and things like that and special abilities. And then there's just a whole mess of scenarios in here. We just have some basic scenarios here, and there's scenarios that have to go with different campaigns. If you get the Vogelland's book, the main book is sort of sparse in terms of the lore. There's a little bit in there, but a lot of the lore comes in this Vogelland book, and there's two sort of narrative campaigns. As well, there's some more environments, and there are some environments in the basic book here. So let's skip through all these scenarios. There's a good amount of scenarios. Here we go. Environments. So these are just sort of special rules. If you ever played Age of Sigmar, you'll kind of know what this is. So you can kind of plug and play different realms or different lands that will sort of change the rules and will, you know, modify the different rewards that you can get. And so you can kind of plug and play all of these kind of different components. So it is very toolkitty in terms of the different scenarios that you can use, the different environments that you can plug in and stuff like that. So you can craft your own, maybe after you play a few different narrative campaigns, you can sort of plug and play. And it does really give you a good sense of how to maybe construct your own campaign with how this sort of, these sort of templates lay themselves out here. So that's really neat. And there's some other rules that frankly I haven't touched on. There's wandering monsters and things like that. And so there's got rules for that, so if you want to add that. So as a Frostgrave fan, that's a nice welcome thing. So there's some extra rules like that. So you can kind of take or leave, you know, as much as you want as you get started. So let's talk about how the game mechanics actually work. And we'll use these two characters from the Lone Guard and the Bone Constructs here as our examples, because they give you kind of a good amount of information here. So the first thing to talk about here is the points. And I talked about the influence points down here. So in a match play, the influence points are the same as this number here, which is on item cards and abilities. So you would use gold in a campaign. So, but when you're just doing a one-off game, you just add these numbers, you play to like 75 points, 100 points, whatever you feel like doing. But then in a campaign, you'll get a certain amount of influence that you can spend on characters and a certain amount of gold that you can spend on kind of the extra cards and so on. Now you can see here is the type of card it is. So you can see it's a weapon card. Now if we take a look here, you can see actually that both of these characters can use it. If I zoom in a little bit there, so you can see that matches that type, and they can have two of these cards with a fist and so on, and one of these other cards. So this is sort of like the slots, if you think about it, like X-Wing or Diablo or something, that you can fit these cards into. And so this is what they're able to equip with themselves. So that's very easy to sort of deck build or army build, is you just take the cards. It's a lot like X-Wing. You take the little upgrade cards and accessory cards, just like X-Wing, and plug them in, and then you play to a certain number of points. Now, the way that the actions work on a game, it's an alternating activation. One side goes, the other side goes. You roll off an initiative. Now, if you win the initiative, let's say this side is blue, and then these guys are white, you can give up initiative to get a extra reroll on a recovery at the end of the round. So you do an initiative roll, and then you oscillate back and forth, activating your different models, and then you do like a very brief recovery phase. But let's say the human player here wants to keep that. Now what they're going to do once they start activating their models is they're going to pick a model here, Lone Guard Commander, and then he gets 5 action points, and that just very simply means he gets 5 dice. And these are action points that you can just spend or sometimes roll to do different actions. So you can spend a die to do a movement, and you can see he moves 3 inches. Or very simply, you could do like an attack. Now there's a whole kind of lot of information here about what you're able to do. So let's say simply, let's look at the Dark Wanderer first. If he wanted to spend one of his action dice to do an attack, he's got to be within half an inch unless it's a ranged attack. And then he's going to roll 1 die, and then he's got to get this die or higher. He's got to get a 3 or higher to get a hit, and then the +3 is the amount of damage that he will add. So if he gets a hit, let's say he was attacking this fella here, he rolls, of course, oh, I did get a 3. And so then he will take and roll what's called a challenge die. So in the game they refer to action dice, which is what your pool of dice is, and they refer to challenge die. Challenge die is just some dice that you take that's not part of your action pool, and then you roll that. So he did get a hit. So we're going to just take another die that wasn't one of the ones out of the action pool, and then roll that. It's going to be this much damage +3. And then the opponent here has the armor, so they're going to take a challenge die. Let's just use the blue die, and they're going to take that, and so they have now 3 defense. So this is 7 to 3, and so they're going to take 4 damage. And then what you do is you slide these into sleeves here, and then mark them off, or you can use little cubes or anything, or a little dice by the cards, whatever you want to do. But you mark these off. And then as you sort of take damage, once you cover up these little spots here, that's actually going to reduce the number of action dice that you use. So if he takes 3 damage this time, then next time he's not going to use all 5 action dice, he's going to use 4. And then once you get down to here to the skull, then they're effectively kind of knocked down and out. Now they can recover, which I'll talk about at the end. But if they take damage again after being sort of knocked out here, then they are killed and removed from from the board there. Now let's look at a slightly different example. The lone guard here has this tireless onslaught. It's the same idea. He's got to roll 4, and then but he gets 4 damage plus this challenge die roll. But he can do this action 3 times, because on your turn you can only do each action usually 1 time. So you have to sort of juggle, what you're going to do there. Now, one thing that you can do is spend one of your action dice to go like on a dodge. You can kind of use it as a dodge marker. So if they get attacked on their next turn, they can then roll this die in addition to the challenge die that they roll and add it to their armor. So it gives them a little bit more tough of a defensive stance there. The other thing that you can do is you can use one of your action dice here to sort of focus and then add to that. So if I wanted to do one of these attacks or the tireless onslaught, and I'm like, I really want this to hit, then I can spend an additional die to add to that, and I've just still got to beat 4 there. And so with that, we just were ensuring it's almost like an aim action. Now some attacks, like this one here, you can see this one is a special ability here. It's darkness only, so you obviously couldn't assign it to this guy here. And you can see it has 2 dice, but let's read it. So, may only target disabled character. So remember when I talked about when you get knocked down here? So you can only target a knockdown disabled character. When a character is destroyed by this ability, replace it with a Bone Stalker under your control. The Bone Stalker cannot activate until the next round. But it's a little bit difficult. It's always going to cost you 2 dice, but you can see that because you've got to get 8 on there. So you need 2 dice. It's going to cost you 2 dice, and it just gives you the +1 because the damage in that doesn't matter, because if you're disabled, you do not get to roll for defense. Now there's another interesting thing. So this next part I'm going to talk about is an advanced rule, but I've never not used it. So if you get exactly the die matching there, so if I rolled a perfect 4 and 4, then I can add an extra d6 of damage. Now if I rolled exactly like if it was just a single die attack and I just rolled a 4, it just adds an extra +2 on the attack. And that's sort of an advanced / optional rule. But that's really just the gist of the game, kind of taking and activating what's on the card, possibly using these fate weave actions that I talked about and spending influence from your campaign, and using those. These are very powerful abilities, sort of calling the forces of nature to your side. There's a couple other rules about kind of jumping and moving around, disengaging from characters, but very simply, it's very easy to jump in. You generate a pool of dice, you'll use up all of those dice, and then spend them doing actions and moving around. It's very easy to deck build, but that is pretty much the gist of the game. Okay, so that is a Relicblade. Let's go through my 3 pillars of review, but let's kind of get that out of the way because I really love this game. I'm really blown away by it. So the first pillar I usually talk about is player count. I've not played this with more than 2 players. It's really kind of designed to be a 2-player game. There's not really any rules or anything for doing specifically like a big narrative campaign with a big group or anything, but I don't think it's really meant to do that. But there are some rules for having more than 2 players. Those are there, and I think there's enough kind of plug and play toolkit aspects of it. Kind of talked about that during the walkthrough. There's enough of that it's easy to modify and make it like that. In terms of play time, the scenarios are really quick. You start off in a 2x2 area, and you're kind of already right in each other's faces, and so the action is going to happen pretty quickly. It's objective-based gameplay, so it's not there's not like a lot of slogging to it. So you basically play the objective of the scenario, or if you wipe out the other side, then you win that. And so the playtime's really quick. It's like half an hour maybe for a scenario. Probably quicker than that, honestly, once you kind of get into the game. And then my last pillar is, what is this game like? And that's where I can start to talk about why I really do enjoy this game. So the main sort of takeaway for me that it's really not like other games, or at least other miniature skirmish games, is that dice action pool sort of aspect. You have some other dice-driven games like bolt action style games like that, but it's not really like that at all. But the dice pool is very much like a Euro board game kind of idea. It really reminds me of Claustrophobia in some ways. If you've ever played Claustrophobia or Claustrophobia 1643, that's a board game. It's a miniature skirmish game on a board. But it kind of sort of reminds me about that. Then the mechanics are completely different. But the way you have that sort of action pool is very, very, very satisfying because you've got, you know, a limited amount of action, and then you know, as you take a little bit of damage, you kind of go down, you get a little bit weaker, but it doesn't really hamper anything you can do. It just, you can't do quite as much as what you could do before. So it's a very simple, elegant kind of solution to that. And you take 2-3 points of damage, and now instead of 5 action points, you have 4. And then the way that you can manipulate and mitigate the dice here is a very board gamey feeling thing. So if you're watching this as a miniature type of viewer, that's a good thing. And if you're watching this as a board gamer, like kind of curious about this miniature game, that's also a good thing, because it's a real interesting sort of micro puzzle with each activation of your figures, because you're like, okay, do I use this dice to focus more? Do I throw one down to get a dodge action because I feel like I'm gonna get jumped on next turn or next activation? You know, and then how, you know, do I really want to spend this die and get that really big ability, but it's a little harder to achieve, and so on. So the way that it sort of, you know, slices up all the actions of a character is really cool. And the plug and play aspect of just kind of building your warband where you get the cards, it's just like X-Wing in that way. Where you get the cards, you get the abilities, and then you can slot them in based on the icons of the cards, and then they all cost a different number of points. That makes for a lot of fun tinkering and stuff like that. Just kind of, and the nice thing is it's all card driven, and he does have extra card decks that are on the site, and everything is really, frankly, in my opinion, reasonably priced. You know, the card decks are like, I think they're $5 or $6 for a deck of cards, and it's just the cards. Not like, you know, not to like, you know, throw darts at other companies, but they're not like bundled with a miniature you don't care about. You know, you can just get neutral cards and things like that, and other decks of the relics, which I didn't really, frankly, talk about in there. But when you go through the campaign and stuff, some of your treasures and things like that, you're going to get like treasure tokens that you can will be kind of based on the scenario and based on the realm that you're in. That will be like different items in gold, and then you have relics that you'll draw out of a deck, and then you'll use those. So you have to kind of escape with those. A lot of the scenarios are driven by you know, finding the relic and so on. But you can get other decks of relics, you can get other monsters that come with their own card and stuff like that. So it's very easy to get in, and then it kind of has that, you know, just one more model kind of feel. I can already kind of feel myself like, oh, this would be really cool to add this model, and then, you know, it's only like $35 to get the pig models, and those look really fun, you know. So, but then I can splash those in and sort of mix and match, because it's just kind of two main factions, adversary and advocate. But you can get very specific, or you can kind of keep it more open and general. And it's like I showed you, some of the cards are specific, like it's just darkness only, so you can only have a darkness guy do that. Or some of them are like class specific. There'll be keywords on the card. So the plug and play ability is just really cool. And then, like I said, beyond just the sort of the deck building or the list building, you have the plug and play ability of what comes in the 2 books, in terms of, like, you know, get the game, play it, and then throw in some environmental effect, or, you know, throw in this. There's actually, I should have mentioned when I went to the walkthrough, there's a sort of a semi-procedurally generated scenario builder thing. So you take this, so if you think about it, and this is kind of, you're going to kind of see why I really like this game. It reminds me of Age of Sigmar in a lot of ways, the way that the ecosystem is built up. So you can pick like a deployment setup. So you have, like, you remember in Sigmar or 40K, you have deployment cards. So you have deployment setup, and then you pick an objective, and you kind of mix and match those together. So you could play, oh, let's try that same deployment setup, but with completely different kind of objectives and all that stuff. So you can kind of really play around with swapping around all that kind of stuff. So the plug and play part of this goes beyond just the army building, the list building, and into creating the campaign, creating just a scenario to play very quickly. And so that just makes it very, very easy to get into and easy to play around. It's like I said, it's a toolkit. It's like a toy box of all this stuff. And just kind of aesthetically, I will say, so, like, I wouldn't say I was like disappointed in this part of it, because it was quickly rectified, but there's not really like a lot of lore in this, but I wasn't really like looking for that in this. It's sort of like, it almost reminded me, the way it was described in the rule book is like the old Ultima games, like Ultima Online, Ultima 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They get the 10? I think they got the, or 9. Maybe they got the 9. Anyway, it's where you have sort of like gone through the planes of dimensions and you're some kind of avatar and controlling this warband kind of thing. I was like, okay, that's fine. But then it gets into more of the lore inside the Vogelland. So there's like, oh, there's some history here. There was like a schism. I can't remember what they called it in there. There's like a great rupturing. And so that's kind of what's opened up the planes. And so you have these kind of mix and match of different types of beings and stuff, the undead, the pigs, the pigmen, and you know, all that stuff. And there's elves, and there's like some more, I can't remember what they're called. They're like wood elves and then regular elves. And there's little hints in here about other factions and things like that. So getting into it from that aspect, and then just really, frankly, the illustrations and everything on the cards and in the rule book are amazing, and the sculpts are great. And just visually, the world is really neat. You know, it's just kind of, you know, this is not like heavy. It's not like a big, you know, backlog of lore, like a 40K or something. But there's like enough there that it's illustrated in such a good way, and the sculpts are so kind of animated and just well kind of constructed that it just kind of pulls me in personally. The other thing I wanted to say was, so I know I bag on metal miniatures probably too much on here. I really do not like metal miniatures, but again, I wanted to just kind of stress that because I know I have said that a lot. That really worried me going into this game, to be frank. And I was like, okay, I've heard a lot of good things about this from Ash Barker over at Gorilla Miniature Games. If you haven't seen his channel, you want to see some battle reports of Relicblade, hop over there. I'll give you a good sense of, you know, kind of a playthrough of it. You know, he's been kind of on it, and some of you all as viewers have mentioned it, like, hey, try Relicblade. And I was like, okay, like, it looks cool, but like, you know. And so I finally reached out to them, and they sent me this stuff. And I was like, oh God, I hope the metal is not, you know, that's like really gave me pause. I was like, ooh, I hate metal, but I've sometimes metal's good, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's terrible. And it was fine, like, to me. So that's the one thing about this where like I would 1,000,000% recommend this. Like, if you've never played a miniature game, I would a million percent say, oh, you got to get this, because it's easy to get into. You don't have to like shell out hundreds of bucks. It's not, you know, it's not like a $150 starter set. You can get the rule book and another faction for $60. Your buddy can get the other one for like $35, you know, and so you can be all in with a couple of factions for like $100, and you're in. You know, you've got everything you need. And then you can slowly, onesie-twosie, add little decks of cards and stuff here and there. Like $5, like a cup of coffee, you know. And, but the metal miniatures are not bad, but they're not, like, you've never assembled a miniature before, I gotta say, you know, come at this with a little bit of preparation in terms of like, this is not something I've done before, you know. That, I would pump the brakes on absolute beginner there. But if you can sort of get through that, and, you know, or you've played some other miniature games, or even if you're an advanced kind of miniature gamer, this might be a little bit on the simplistic side for you. But I mean, I don't call myself advanced or whatever beginner, but I played a lot of miniature games, especially over the last several years, and I've really found this to be very, very, very engaging. Anyway, with just those kind of couple of small caveats, depending if you're a beginner or a really advanced kind of miniature gamer, I highly recommend this game. You know, folks should definitely take a look at it. It's really kind of a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. The illustrations, the aesthetics, the gameplay, the design, all of it. It's really, really cool. So definitely take a look at this one. Thanks.